And Canada called me a couple of weeks ago. They want to be part of it. To which I said, well, why don't you just join our country? You become 51, become the 51st state.
More than 70% of respondents feel that Trump's comments have strengthened Canadian pride. Close to 80% of Canadians would never vote to become part of the U.S.
When Donald Trump joked that Canada could become the 51st state, it might have sounded like a throwaway line from a campaign rally. But for Canadians, it hit differently. A new Ipsos survey for Global News found that nearly 80% of Canadians said they would never vote to join the United States, while more than 70% said the remark made them prouder to be Canadian. That statistic alone tells the story of a shift in attitude. What began as a jab from Washington has turned into a rallying cry north of the border. Trump's tariffs, his insults, and his brand of political showmanship have not weakened Canada. They have done the opposite. Across provinces, people are turning inward, thinking about what it means to rely less on the U.S. market. From lumber towns in British Columbia to battery factories in Ontario, the same idea is spreading. Canada can build, Canada can supply, and Canada can stand on its own. This new wave of determination didn't appear in a vacuum. It began with economic pressure, diplomatic tension, and a feeling that Washington had crossed a line not just in trade, but in respect. When Trump returned to power in January 2025, his administration launched a new wave of import duties on major trading partners. Canada was hit especially hard. By March 2025, Washington imposed 25 to 35% duties on key exports: softwood lumber, steel, automotive parts, and furniture. Even energy, long protected, faced a 10% tax. These measures, justified on security grounds, aimed to pressure Ottawa in the USMCA review. Instead, they damaged both economies. In British Columbia, cross-border traffic dropped for 8 straight months. Data from the Cascade Border Data Warehouse showed that between February and September, the number of BC vehicles heading south fell by 40% year over year. That decline reflected more than economics. Many Canadians said they no longer felt welcome in the U.S. Workers in the lumber sector stopped traveling south. Families canceled vacations. Meanwhile, small towns in Washington state, long dependent on Canadian shoppers, began to suffer. The Border Policy Research Institute warned the trend was alarming and could force local businesses to change how they operate. Trump's tariffs didn't just hurt Canada, they began eroding America's own border economy.
Right now, we're going to boycott it.
I am not interested in traveling to the States.
Doesn't sound like a very nice place to visit right now.
The trade pressure might have been manageable on its own, but Trump's comments added a different kind of sting. During a public event in mid-2025, he claimed that Canada had called him wanting to be part of it. He followed with the line, "Why don't you just join our country, become the 51st state?" For many Canadians, that was the moment the debate stopped being about tariffs and started being about dignity. The Ipsos poll for Global News, conducted shortly afterward, revealed a national shift in mood. Nearly 4 out of 5 Canadians rejected even the idea of joining the U.S., and most said the statement had strengthened their pride in being Canadian. Political analysts say the comment touched a nerve because it came at a time when Canada's sovereignty was already under pressure. Trump had linked his 51st state quip to discussions about a joint missile defense system, something he called the Golden Dome. The suggestion that defense cooperation could come with a hint of annexation was viewed in Ottawa as deeply offensive. By the time Prime Minister Mark Carney prepared for his meeting with Trump in early October, the mood in Canada was unmistakable. The 51st state line had become a symbol, proof that the United States was no longer treating its northern neighbor as an equal partner. Instead of bending to that pressure, the backlash united the country. Across political lines, Canadians began to rally around one idea. If Washington wanted dominance, Canada would answer with independence. Ottawa's first step was economic retaliation. In March 2025, Canada imposed counter-tariffs worth about 30 billion Canadian dollars, matching Washington's duties dollar for dollar. The targets were deliberate: American steel, aluminum, household goods, and even symbolic products like lawn equipment and household tools. This move wasn't meant to escalate forever. It was designed to show that Canada would not remain passive. By early September, Prime Minister Carney announced that Canada would lift some of those counter tariffs, but only for products compliant with the USMCA's regional content rules. It was a tactical signal. Canada would reward fair trade, not political coercion. The decision had immediate local effects. Cross-border trade in certain consumer goods improved slightly, and businesses in border towns like Blaine, Washington, began to see Canadian customers returning. But the political message was unmistakable. Canada was taking the high ground, showing restraint while maintaining leverage. Carney's words summed up the new posture clearly: Canada is not for sale. That phrase became a headline across national outlets and a quiet statement of policy. Canada would negotiate, but never surrender its sovereignty. Behind the scenes, Canada also began accelerating programs that could reduce dependence on U.S. supply chains. Provinces rolled out incentives for critical minerals, electric vehicle components, and defense manufacturing. Ontario announced a $17.5 million grant to Electra battery materials for North America's first cobalt sulfate refinery, designed to produce 6,500 tons a year, enough to power 1 million electric vehicles. At the same time, the federal government opened consultations to speed up mining approvals under the One Canadian Economy Bill, ensuring future projects wouldn't be stalled by the same bureaucratic delays that had haunted resource development for decades. The message was clear. If Washington wanted to weaponize trade, Canada would respond by weaponizing innovation and production. As autumn arrived, a new narrative emerged. Trump's tariffs and remarks had backfired. They had driven Canadians to look inward, invest locally, and redefine sovereignty. Communities once reliant on U.S. buyers found new export partners in Europe and Asia. Ottawa expanded trade missions to Indonesia, South Korea, and the EU, focusing on diversification. Pollsters noted that national pride and support for independent economic policy had reached their highest levels in more than a decade. Even Canada's diplomatic tone shifted, less reactive, more strategic. Trump's pressure campaign, meant to extract concessions, instead strengthened Canada's resolve. His 51st state line, meant to assert dominance, only underscored the country's independence. Border crossings may have fallen, but investment at home is climbing. Public unity has grown stronger, and industries once tied to U.S. demand are finding their own footing. From Ottawa to Vancouver, one message echoes: Canada will not be intimidated. It will innovate. In the end, Trump's campaign of pressure did not weaken his northern neighbor. It gave Canada a reason to rebuild, not as a sovereign, but as a sovereign nation determined to shape its own future. That is the paradox of 2025. Every attempt to make Canada smaller has, in fact, made it stronger. Recently, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a forceful performance at a press conference in London. The moment came when a reporter pressed him with the criticism that he was simply flying around the world without achieving anything concrete.
Conservatives say you are jetting around but getting nothing done. You've met with numerous leaders while you've been here, but you're not signing a new deal or announcing a new partnership. What have you achieved tangibly for Canadians during this trip?
Instead of avoiding the question, Carney pointed to new trade deals, fresh partnerships, and meetings with global investment leaders.
We are focused on building a new web of trade relationships around the globe. In June, Canada signed the EU Strategic Partnership for the Future to deepen trade and mutual economic security. Last week in Mexico, I worked with President Sheinbaum to launch a new Canada-Mexico action plan to build fresh economic opportunities for our workers and businesses. Now, while in the UK, I've met with business and investment leaders to discuss new economic opportunities and partnerships as we look to attract capital to Canada.
What looked like a challenge quickly turned into a showcase of strategy. At the very moment Washington is erecting trade barriers, Canada is presenting itself as an open destination for capital and new alliances. This scene matters because Canadians at home are anxious. Jobs are being threatened by U.S. tariffs, and many families are worried about rising costs. Carney's response in London was aimed not only at the journalist in the room, but also at those Canadians who want reassurance that their government is acting with urgency and direction. Carney emphasized that Canada is not waiting for opportunity to arrive at its door. In London and New York, he met with some of the world's largest infrastructure funds, the type of global investors that finance projects from energy to digital networks. His message was simple. Canada is building a modern economy and needs hundreds of billions of dollars in investment over the next decade. Ottawa has already taken steps to back that ambition. In its first 4 months, the government cut personal income taxes for more than 22 million Canadians and reduced capital gains taxes. It removed federal barriers to interprovincial trade to create what Carney calls one Canadian economy. It passed legislation to fast-track approvals for energy, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, and trade infrastructure. And it launched Build Canada Homes to double the pace of residential construction. These policies, coupled with outreach to investors, are meant to attract capital that might otherwise hesitate in today's uncertain climate. While President Trump is pursuing tariffs that unsettle markets, Canada is telling investors that it offers stability, predictability, and the chance to grow long-term careers for Canadian workers. For investors, the signal is clear. Canada is not only lowering domestic barriers, but also promising access to growing export markets. International funds are increasingly drawn to places where governments act quickly to approve projects and provide clarity on taxation. By placing these reforms front and center, Carney is sending a message that global capital is welcome and will be safeguarded. Beyond capital flows, Ottawa is widening its trade horizons. In September, Canada signed its first bilateral trade agreement with an ASEAN country. The deal with Indonesia reduces or eliminates tariffs on 95% of Canadian exports to a nation of more than 270 million people that is projected by the International Monetary Fund to become the 5th largest economy in the world within 2 decades. Days earlier, Carney launched the Canada-Mexico Action Plan, setting a path for joint economic initiatives as both countries prepare for the scheduled review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. In Europe, Canada signed a strategic partnership for the future in June, and negotiations are already in a second phase. The framework is linked to Europe's new SAFE initiative and the Rearm Europe plan, both of which involve hundreds of billions of euros in infrastructure and defense spending. Each of these steps moves Canada further from reliance on a single market. Trump's tariffs were designed to pressure Ottawa, yet in practice, they have accelerated Canada's turn toward Asia, Europe, and Mexico. What was meant to isolate has instead pushed Canada to diversify. The contrast is striking. In Washington, new tariffs are being announced on pharmaceuticals, furniture, and heavy trucks, creating fresh waves of uncertainty. In London, Carney is describing a Canada that is opening new doors, signing deals, and presenting itself as a partner for the future. A question that might have put him on the defensive instead became an opportunity to underline a broader message. Canada is not shrinking under pressure. It is using that very pressure to expand its reach, reduce its dependence, and strengthen its economy. For Canadians, the outcome of these moves will be measured in jobs, investment, and long-term security. For the United States, it is a reminder that trade wars often come with unintended consequences.
Channel Prime Minister Mark Carney getting ready to head to Europe today. His Prime Minister will be in the United Kingdom for more trade talks with the British.
Are really important, and I think that in a world like we're living in today, it's good to have friends. It's really important to have friends, and for a country like Canada, our prosperity and our security depends on alliances. That leader-to-leader level contact and relationship is critical to that.
In late September, 2 very different visits to London told 2 very different stories. Prime Minister Mark Carney arrived seeking new trade opportunities, investments, and allies at a moment when Canada is under economic pressure. Only days before, President Donald Trump had also stood on British soil.
President Trump just touched down for his second state visit to the United Kingdom, but amidst the fanfare of his pending meetings with the royal family and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the Jeffrey Epstein scandal is still casting quite a shadow all the way across the
He was greeted with royal ceremony at Windsor Castle, but his visit became overshadowed when activists projected images linking him to Jeffrey Epstein onto the castle walls. 4 people were arrested, yet the images made headlines worldwide. The contrast is striking. Trump's trip was heavy on pomp but marred by scandal, while Carney's trip is about building real economic ties.
We're seeing, and you're familiar with the European relationship with Canada as well, the idea that we've got to look elsewhere because the U.S. arguably has gone rogue on us.
Exactly. And no matter what else happens in the future, Carney is spot on when he says it's never going to get back to what it was. And so that's something that the Americans are going to take some time to understand and to deal with.
To understand why Carney's mission matters, we need to step back to Washington's trade agenda. Since early September, the Trump administration has been enforcing its reciprocal tariff program. The framework sets ceilings of 15 to 50% on imports and adds targeted surcharges, including a 100% duty on patented pharmaceuticals starting October 1, a 25% tariff on heavy trucks, and a 30% tariff on upholstered furniture. The White House describes these measures as a show of economic strength and a push to rebalance global trade. But the ripple effects have landed heavily on Canada. Manufacturing jobs are under strain as costs rise and exports decline. Canadian officials have warned that automotive and metal exports are particularly exposed. Ottawa has been forced to look outward, seeking to rewire trade ties that for over a century leaned almost entirely on the United States. This is why London matters. Canada and the UK had paused negotiations on a comprehensive deal in early 2024, but now both sides are revisiting the possibility. Trump's tariffs, meant to project American leverage, have instead accelerated Canada's determination to build elsewhere. Carney's agenda in the UK is ambitious. He is meeting Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as well as leaders from Spain, Denmark, Iceland, and Australia. His team is also engaging London's financial sector, presenting Canada's national projects as magnets for global investment. These projects include large-scale infrastructure and energy corridors that require billions in private capital. By highlighting Canada's stability and resources, Carney is hoping to attract those dollars. Canada's selling points are clear. It is part of NATO, maintains a trade deal with the European Union, and is a member of the Asia-Pacific Partnership. It controls vast supplies of critical minerals, energy, and agriculture. Former diplomats have emphasized that alliances and private sector investment are essential if these advantages are to translate into long-term prosperity. In London, Carney is not simply making polite visits. He is positioning Canada as a partner capable of supplying resources, securing trade corridors, and creating jobs at home. What makes this effort more urgent is the timing. With the U.S. market becoming less predictable under Trump's tariffs, investors are watching closely for alternatives. Carney's meetings in London allow him to present Canada not just as a neighbor to the United States, but as a global hub that can anchor supply chains stretching from Europe to the Pacific. This narrative of resilience gives his pitch added weight in the eyes of foreign partners. The difference between the two leaders' trips could not be clearer. Trump's state visit was wrapped in tradition but haunted by images of his past association with Epstein. Even as he met with the royal family, that shadow followed the story across headlines in both Britain and the United States. Carney's London trip, on the other hand, is less dramatic on the surface but aimed at substantive results. By holding talks with multiple leaders and courting global investors, he is quietly shaping Canada's next chapter in trade and security. The larger lesson is about the unintended consequences of policy. Trump's tariffs were designed to showcase American economic strength. Instead, they have pushed allies like Canada to diversify faster and deepen ties with others. One visit produced headlines about scandal. The other is about building economic bridges. In the end, the tariffs are not isolating Canada. They are motivating it to chart a more independent path. And London is the stage where that change is coming into view.